that there's whole strands of feminism. Let me quickly say that there are many, many strands of feminism, so any characterization one gives, one can find a counterexample of some school somewhere that doesn't believe that. But there are many strands of feminism that have somehow got themselves into the view that unless there's sameness, there can't be fairness, that somehow the notion that men and women are in any ways fundamentally different is going to undermine any quest for a fair and egalitarian society. And that, of course, is nonsense. The very basic notion of sexism is that women were discriminated against qua women, where it was irrelevant that they were women, so not being allowed into universities, not because they weren't university material, but because they were women is an obvious example of that. Not being allowed to own property, not because they were in some way incapable of managing property, but simply because they were women. But now there's been a very strong move, particularly among American feminists, to assume that somehow any notion that we're not exactly the same as men is going to undermine a feminist cause. And this has gone along with this absolutely absurd notion that you've got to have 50-50 representation everywhere of men and women, and if you don't have it, it's because sexism is operating. This is where the notion of the glass ceiling often comes in, that it's assumed that any jobs that women look at, there should be able to be 50-50, and if there isn't, it must be because there's a glass ceiling stopping women getting to the top. Note that it's usually the problem about getting to the top. It's not to do with very low-level work. That there's any worry about that, and neither is it to do with work that typically goes to men, for example, deep-sea diving or firefighting or jobs like that. I've never ever heard a call for 50-50% of women on that.
What about boxing and wrestling?
Well, this is a very interesting one because there's been this feeling that you have to argue sameness and not just fairness. I think a lot of areas that women would naturally not tend to want to go into, the few women who are at the end of the curve who do have gone into those areas, and that's opened up again the call for, but then why aren't they 50-50? Look, once women were allowed into these areas, some women went into them.
Right.
And so if you don't get equal representation, there must be something wrong. There's no recognition that there might be a deep difference between men and women, such that it was only women at the extreme end of the curve, the outliers, who would want to.
Isn't there a situation